Well, good morning. How's everybody doing? Yeah, it's great to see you all. How many parents here are ready for your kids to go back to school? Oh, come on. There we go. Get a couple hands high. All right, now, in my home, I have 3 children, and my daughter is excited about school, my youngest daughter, and my boys, they're not as much excited about school. Does anybody here have somebody in your home where, like, you're going to have to take them kicking and screaming in the first day? Anybody like that here? That's great. Yeah. That's fun. Welcome to the crowd. It's wonderful to do that. So I am ready, though. As a parent, I got to tell you, I'm ready for school to start because I need rhythm in my life again. I want to get up, take my kids to the bus. My oldest goes really early, and so take him to the bus and then go work out and get my rhythm of life. I need that. I need my rhythm back. So yay, the fall is here. I'm happy about it. We are in that has nothing to do with the sermon whatsoever today, by the way. That's just your pastor venting for a few moments. It is good to be with you all. We are in our series, The 12 Disciples and the Apostle Paul, the latecomer. And it's actually the last week. We've looked at all these different guys, some of them dynamic, some of them loud, some of them outspoken. And today we want to look at the ones that we don't know a lot about. And here's the way it works through history, okay? There are people that are memorable. There are people that share their opinions, they have really good ideas, really good thoughts, they push back. There are people, the way they're geared, they're sanguine, they're outgoing, they're dynamic, they're influential. There are people that are memorable. And then there are the rest of us. Now, I don't mean to be mean, I don't mean to point fingers or push back, but there are a lot of us, most of us all through history. I mean, even in your own mind, if you were going to try to remember your great-great-grandpa, maybe you could remember his whole name, but you probably couldn't remember what he did. We all default to farmer, right? He was a farmer, we're going to say that. But we don't know, and the reality is most of us in just a few generations are going to be forgotten. We're going to be forgotten. The sea of us, the mass of humanity through all of human history, even inside the church, the massive chorus of normal people all through history. What an encouraging way to start your morning. But here's the deal, man. Even with the disciples, there are some of these disciples, the followers of Christ, the leadership team of Jesus himself, and these were the ones that were memorable. The Peters and the John, James, the ones that were outspoken, the ones that carried the load, the ones that were the primary leaders. And even among the 12, there were people that we just don't know much about. What do we do with all the normal people? I want you to imagine a small group. We've done this every week. You're at your house hanging out with your friends, and your friends start coming over. You've got your small group, and all of your friends have different personalities. You've got Peter, right? Peter's a great guy, but he's bold, he's emotional, he's the overtalker in the group. Peter's the one that's interrupting everybody. You may know a Peter, you may be a Peter. Peter's the one that's always telling the stories. Peter is type A, he's a risk taker. One of Peter's hardest things to do is to just shut his yapper. You may be a Peter. Then you've got guys like John. John, brilliant, calculated. Guys like John. Now, you need to know if you're new here or watching online or listening on the radio, a lot of how we study the disciples is the canonized scripture, but we're doing everything we can to learn. So even historians, different writers, thinkers, different theologians and what they've wrestled through, how they've landed on this. So a lot of this is as much speculation based on contextual evidence as it is direct canonized evidence from the scriptures, okay? So with that in mind, we even look at John, and John is this guy. He's brilliant, he's calculated, a leader who loves justice. John may be like your lawyer of the group. He became unstoppable when he fully accepted the work of Jesus Christ. Okay, so if you were to put these two together, Peter and John, John is the one who's Mr. Well Actually, all right? So you got Peter. Peter walks in the room and Peter's telling the story. Guys, we went fishing the other day, us disciples, and it was amazing. We caught a ton of fish, and they were this big. And John walks in the room and John goes, no, Peter, we didn't catch a ton of fish. Actually, we caught probably 15 and they were more like this, all right? So you've got Peter and John. I am sure that conversation, and you know what this is like hanging out with your friends. You got the exaggerator, the way excited over the top thinker, and then you've got your person who has to bring it all back down to earth. This is happening with the disciples too. And then you have Matthew. Matthew, of course, He's the vile sinner, Levi, becoming Matthew, the outcast, the traitor to his people, whom Jesus ends up giving him the name Matthew, well, Levi, then he gave him the name Matthew, which means the gift of God. One of the greatest conversion stories in the New Testament, and a lesson that no one is too lost to follow Jesus. No one is. You see, when Matthew walks in the room, there's probably this feeling of, what are you doing here? And then you got Thomas, the natural doubter. He's the Eeyore of the group. Everything's terrible. Life is awful. The food isn't very good. It took too long to get our service. I'm so tired of this. Why in the world? Man, do you seriously have to chomp your gum right in my ear? I don't know if they had gum back then. I'm making that up, right? But like, this is Mr. Eeyore, always whining and complaining. I'm sure this was a fun group to be with at times. You got Philip, the Hellenist. All right, now a Hellenist is somebody who adopts Greek culture. So literally, as he's defined, the lover of horses. In fact, the name Philip means lover of horses. That's a rough name too. But Philip, and Philip keeps the Greek name. He keeps his Greek name. All right, so Levi gets Matthew, and he gets to keep his Greek name. Now, this is really important as we studied this a few weeks ago, because Philip literally is this guy that has adopted the Greek culture. So he's the one that hangs out in the group, but he doesn't look like a good Jew. He doesn't look the good Jewish role, man. He's adopted the Greek culture. He looks Greek, talks Greek, acts Greek, dresses Greek. This is the person that may walk in the church. I mean, he doesn't know any better. This is the person who's smoking outside the doors and walks in. He's like, what's up? He's the dude that walks in, has Jesus is my homeboy on his t-shirt. You know, he doesn't know you're supposed to wear a tie every Sunday morning. He doesn't have the suit on. He doesn't get all this holiness Christian church stuff. And then Jesus, in his wonderful way, picks this guy who's a Hellenist, adapted Greek culture, and then he also grabs Simon the Zealot. He was one who would have been associated with a politically motivated group who at times would even be militantly opposed to Rome. And so here you have Simon the Zealot, the ultra-conservative. Hair has to be above your ears if you're a guy. If you're a girl, it's got to be in a bun. You know, you got your long sleeves all the time. Boys are in a suit and tie no matter what every Sunday. Sitting right next to the guy who smells like cigarette smoke. Love Jesus' ways of doing things. But it's not just that, all right? So you got your overtalker, type A outgoing guy. You've got your lawyer-specific person. You've got your outcast. You've got your guy that looks Greek. You've got your guy that's an unbelievably conservative Jewish person who hates Greek culture, all mixed together in a group. And then you got Judas. And Judas, out of all these guys, probably scares me the most. We talked about him last week. Judas grew up in the right crowd. He heard the correct teachings. He followed Jesus from the very beginning. He even serves in ministry. He's even on the leadership board of Jesus' team. But his heart was never right. Most scholars, based on canonized evidence, state that Judas was in it for the money. He thought maybe Jesus, being the rock star, would pay out. And it's possible to be in the church your whole life, to grow up in that system. It's possible to listen to the teachings of God week in and week out. It's possible to serve in ministry. It's possible to be on leadership teams in the church and still have a heart that's off. Man, I know even for me, I'm thinking if Jesus had a Judas, if Jesus, perfect, right, holy, amazing Jesus even had a Judas, you better believe that there are going to be people like that, today. Whole life in the church, immersed in the culture of Christ, and their hearts aren't there. The trouble is, it's the Judases of the world that really make a bad name for Christianity. But what do we do with the others? What do we do with the rest of the disciples that we don't know a lot about? In fact, I want to give you the remaining disciples and what we do know about them, and it's not a lot, all right? We've spent all week looking at Peter, a whole sermon, and James and some of these other guys. I want to give you just a quick synopsis of the remaining disciples. So the others in this group: Andrew, brother of Peter, fisherman, originally a disciple of John the Baptist, referencing Mark 1, 16 through 18. There's a little bit about him there. Some believed he ministered in Greece and Asia Minor. Can you imagine standing in the shadow of Peter? I mean, the brother of Peter, and there's your brother, dynamic, bold, leader, and you're just kind of along for the ride. So in your family, if you ever grew up and your sibling is like the rock star of the family, they're the ones that everything they did was successful, they were always good at everything, and you always felt like you were second place, welcome to the club. Bartholomew, his name means son of Tomai. Some believe he may have been from royal blood. We don't know a lot about this guy. This is historians writing about him, even outside of the canonized text. Tradition teaches that he was a scholar and a searcher of Scripture. Many believe Bartholomew was an evangelistic partner of Philip and Thomas and suffered martyrdom in Armenia. James the Elder is another one, brother of John and a fisherman. All right, so here we got another situation, another brother. The sons of thunder. John, this dynamic guy, he's engaged. Well, actually, we know, said, here's James, filling in the shadows. James the Lesser. I mean, can you even imagine having that name stuck with you all through history? Like, that's the name you get. Everybody, this poor dude doesn't even know it, that these couple thousand years later, we're going to be remembering him as James the Lesser. Yeah, that's right. Oh, I can't help but feel bad for the dude. Now, the good news is lesser probably translates younger better than it does lesser. And so tradition teaches that he was crucified in Egypt for his faith and worked as a missionary. So it would have been James the Elder, and probably translated better, James, not the lesser, poor dude, but James. And see, he would be the guy that just gets that break. So the way it's translated and plays out in Greek, it probably means James the Younger, but the way it's worded in there, they have to translate it lesser to try to stay more. He would be the guy that gets that break. James the Lesser. And what about Jude, Thaddeus, Lebbeus? All three names, right? One guy given three names in three different settings, often called the man with three names. He was also a zealot like Simon, and that's all we got. This poor dude, man, one of the core central leaders of Jesus' team, and we're not even 100% sure exactly what his name is. That's a rough gig. What can we learn from these normal people? My grandpa, I have two grandpas, Dr. Charles Kolaw and Cale Valesky. They both died, gone to heaven. There are two men in my life that are the most influential people to me. My dad, he's still around, and my grandpa Valesky, Cale Valesky. Grandpa Valesky was South Dakota born, Harley riding, good old boy hunter. I mean, I remember as a kid, him coming in my room early in the morning, like 4 a.m. on a Saturday. Michael, get up. We're going deer hunting. Yes, Grandpa. I can't tell you how many hours I spent at the deer stand with Grandpa or walking around in the woods while it was still dark, talking life. My grandpa was awesome. He was a little rough around the edges, being an old Harley rider. I mean, he was the grandpa when you'd have dinner with the family. I think it'd make my mom nervous sometimes, not exactly know what was going to come out of his mouth. Loved my grandpa. My grandpa was normal. When he was born, it was kind of a difficult birth years ago. And they pulled him out by his arm and it got dislocated, so one of his arms didn't grow quite as long as the others. He literally was like this, one arm shorter than the other. He was a good old boy. He made mistakes. Good old boy made mistakes. I remember going to Sturgis with Grandpa as a young man. I'm not sure my mom knew about this. And I remember walking around there, and as a little boy, I even remember kind of wandering off and Grandpa going, "Oh, no, don't go down that way. Come here." That's my grandpa. Grandpa didn't make a lot of money. He wasn't wealthy. When my grandpa passed away, he couldn't put a business in my hands for me to take over. He couldn't put money in my hands. I mean, he couldn't put anything in my hands, really. I mean, he was just normal. The sea of normal people all through history. The followers of Jesus, he got saved later in life, so he even carried some baggage from his earlier years, pre-Jesus years. And this guy was a whole lot of normal. And at the end of his days, he joins the sea of people all through history that we just don't know much about, including some of the disciples. So what if you aren't the smartest? You're not real dynamic. What if you don't have lots of money or power? What if you don't even like the way you look? What if you make lots of mistakes? What if things slip out of your mouth that you're like, oh, why did I say that? What if you're normal? What if you're average? You're not alone. What can we learn from the followers of Jesus we don't know much about? A couple of major ideas, and we're going to get into this specifically. Our ultimate value is not in our personality. It's not in our personality. You don't have to be an outgoing leader or have a sanguine personality to be used by God. You don't. Our ultimate value is not in our finances. You don't have to be rich to support God's work. Our ultimate value is not in the longevity of our life, man. And in the West, we worship long life. We do everything we can to look as young as we can, as long as we can. Our ultimate value is not in longevity of life. Nearly all of these men died young martyrs. Our ultimate value is not in our education. Not all of these men were well educated. Some of them were. Our ultimate value is not in making a mark and being known after we die. We know very little about these men, but Jesus chose them and used them to begin the church. Our ultimate value is in Jesus. Hebrews 11:35 through 40 is going to be our primary text this morning. And you can turn there if you want to, or open it up on your iPhone or iPad or whatever device you got. Hebrews 11:35, we're going to begin there and read 35 through 45 verses. Women received back their dead by resurrection. Some were tortured, refusing to accept release so that they might rise again to a better life. Others suffered mocking and flogging and chains and imprisonment. Verse 37. They were stoned, they were sawn in two, they were killed with a sword. They went about in skins of sheep and goats, destitute, afflicted, and mistreated, of whom the world was not worthy, wandering about in deserts and mountains, and in dens and caves of the earth. All of these, though commended through their faith, did not receive what was promised. Verse 40, since God had provided something better for us, that apart from us they should not be made perfect. Okay, my grandpa, normal. I think somewhere in our culture we've really embraced this health, wealth, and prosperity theology. Name it, claim it. I mean, you see this stuff on TV where you even have a pastor that says, you know, if you send us your money, I'm going to pray over this cloth and mail it to you. Or if you give this here, you're going to be blessed with wealth beyond your wildest dream. God's going to take care of it. He loves his people. But what about the sea of us who never get wealthy? What about the mass of followers of Jesus, the millions of followers of Jesus all through history that prayed to be healed from their disease and never were? What about them? What about the mass of Christians all through history that asked God, save me from this pain, and it feels like heaven is silent? What about them? What about the stories that we don't share and make much of because, well, they're normal? Like most people, they just died. They didn't make it. Like most people, they didn't become really wealthy. Like most people, they struggled with their struggles through most of their life. Like most people, what do we do with them? My grandpa used to love to drink McDonald's coffee. He couldn't bear the idea of spending $4 at a Starbucks for a cup of coffee. Now that my grandpa has died, I go to Starbucks, Hopefully Jesus isn't telling on me. I'm just kidding. I don't think Jesus would do that. But man, I remember in the latter days of my grandpa's life, we were back in town. This would have been a few weeks, maybe about a couple of months, maybe, before Grandpa died. And I was back in town with my brother and my dad, and we decided to take Grandpa out for coffee. His body is broken. He's had multiple strokes. He doesn't talk well. We help him in the car. You know, he's on oxygen most of the time. And his face is kind of drooping a little bit from the strokes. He can't even form words really well anymore. I mean, it's vastly different than the grandpa I remember. The one hopping fences and hunting deer. It's not the same man. The one that I go camping with, the one that I go fishing with. I remember being a little boy, and I had a BB gun. I was young, probably like 6, 7 years old, and Grandpa gave me a little pump BB gun to go shoot around in the woods with when we were out camping. And there was a huge bullfrog, and I shot it. And I brought it back by its leg. Grandpa, look what I got. I remember this. And Grandpa's like, Michael, bring it over here. So I did, and he takes a knife and cuts off its leg, puts it on a stick, holds it over the fire, and we ate it. That's my grandpa. He's normal. Well, maybe not. He's a good old country boy. I loved my grandpa. And that guy that I remember that I grew up with, I have all those phenomenal memories with of camping and hunting and fishing and living life to the fullest. And there he is. We're unloading him in the parking lot out of the car, and his body is so broken. The last time we'll have coffee with this old man. We help him in, both of us, my brother and I, with my dad opening the door, we help him in. We sit him down at the table. We get him his cheap coffee. And we start talking, and Grandpa just wants to remember the good days, right? So we start talking about this. I'm sharing stories about things I did with Grandpa, and Charles is sharing stories about what he did with him, deer hunting and running around in the woods. And as we get through this, Grandpa pipes up, hey, and he wants to tell a story. And it comes out, and it's jumbled, and he can't get words around it because of the stroke. He can't talk very well. And my dad looks at him and goes, Dad, my dad, it was my mom's dad, but my dad would call him Dad too. And so he goes, Dad, you know what you want to say, don't you? And he goes, he said, can't get it out, can you? And he just starts to cry. He's broke. His body is broke. It doesn't work anymore. It's not functioning properly. And my grandpa, in that moment, man, I remember sitting there and looking at him, and I'm thinking, wow, this is where life takes us. So here we go. Women receive back their dead by resurrection. We're going to come back to that verse in just a moment. Some were tortured, refusing to accept release so that they might rise again to a better life. This is the list of Christians, the list of believers who weren't rescued from the pain. This is the list of believers who didn't become victorious over this torture that was in front of them. These are the list of believers who God doesn't appear to pull from the fire. This is the list of believers whose names aren't written on the side of, they were in the fiery furnace and then God pulled them out. Yay! This is a list of believers who were burned alive. The sea of normal people who didn't become wealthy, who suffered financially, who starved together. This is the list of those believers. Others suffered mocking and flogging, even chains and imprisonment. They were stoned, they were sawn in two, they were killed with the sword. They went about in skins of sheep and goats, destitute, afflicted, and mistreated, of whom the world was not worthy, wandering about in deserts and mountains and dens and caves of the earth. And all of these, though commended through their faith, did not receive what was promised. They did not receive what was promised. Do you read that? This is to all the normal people. who still die from their diseases, who still battle with their addictions. This is to all the normal people who pray for a new job and they get one, but it's not nearly what they were making before. This is to all the normal people who aren't the smartest in their class. This is to all the normal people who have lived in the shadow of their dynamic siblings, who feel second place, who pray for great things, and it feels like heaven is silent. This is to all the normal people. The Crossway study notes, and I'm going to have to explain it. It's a little deep. It's referencing a text in 1 Kings 17 through 24. You don't have to turn there. We're going to go through this quick. Elijah raised the son of the widow of Zarephath. This is referencing a miraculous thing in the Old Testament where the dead come back to life. And Elisha raised the son of a Shunammite woman, referencing 2 Kings 4:18 through 37. So the context of this scripture, at the very beginning of that, where it says women receive their dead by resurrection, it's referencing these Old Testament miracles of the dead coming back to life. They rise again to a better life. That's what it's stated in the text. But it would be translated better, though it doesn't roll off the tongue well, so you don't translate it this way. It would be translated better, obtain better resurrection. They obtained better resurrection, okay? So what it's saying here, this is really important to understand this text. What it's saying is these people that suffered, hang on to the promise of God and count that better than being brought back to life. Back to my grandpa. There we are in McDonald's drinking coffee. He's crying because he can't share the stories that he wants to. His body doesn't work. We're not jumping fences. We're not hunting deer. He hurts bad. And my dad, my brilliant father, I love him. My dad starts talking to my grandpa, and he starts asking him about heaven, right? Now listen to this. This is going to be marked in my mind forever. He looks at my grandpa who's crying at the table because the body is so broken. And he says, "Hey, Dad, it's going to be great when you're freed from this. When you get to heaven, you can run again. You can jump. Maybe even Jesus will let you have a Harley." And I watched my grandpa smile out of half his face. And then my dad says, "Are you excited about that?" With tears. He just nods his head. And see, these people that are normal, the ones who don't get rich, the ones who suffer, the ones who still die from their diseases, the sea of people, of Christianity, all through history, woven through time, this vast choir of normal people, and all they have is the hope of heaven. And the scripture says that's greater than being brought back to life. See, when my grandpa dies, when my grandpa died, he does not want to be brought back into that broken state. I mean, like a claustrophobic person stuck and trapped and wanting to break free. When my grandpa dies, he'll be free from that. He doesn't want to come back to it. Mocking, flogging, chains, imprisonment, stones, sawn in two, killed by the sword, poor, destitute, and mistreated. There are many believers who experience the pain of life, yet they have a strength beyond all of this. Okay, with my grandpa in mind, I want to tell you one more story. About 7 or 8 years ago, I got a phone call from a family in not our church here, but the church I worked in. I didn't work here at that time. And they had a family member who was dying. And this family member was an atheist. And they said, "Would you be willing to meet with our family member? He's only got maybe a couple of days at best. He's on machines. He's in the hospital." And I agreed to it. Those are really hard meetings, by the way. And I go, and I remember walking in, and there's the door, the hospital room. It's closed at the time. Actually, it's cracked open just a little bit. And I remember getting ready to knock, and I remember thinking in my mind, okay, Lord, you got to help me. I don't know what to say when I'm in these situations. I end up walking in, and I see him, and his body's very broken. I don't know what disease he had. I remember they told me, but I can't remember what it was. His fingernails were discolored. Those that are medicine, maybe I can give you enough hints and you'll know what it is. His fingernails were discolored. His skin, I think jaundice or whatever, it was really miscolored. I mean, his eyes were real sunk in. The guy looked really sick. Who are you? Well, I'm a pastor. Love it. And I gave him the context. Your family, whom I won't mention, the name, asked if I would be able to come up, so I did, and here I am, and I hear your time is done. And you get the same common spouts. If God was loving, He wouldn't allow this. I nod my head. I pray with him briefly. And I noticed something as I was trying to figure out whether do I stay and push or do I leave. But here's the thing I noticed. It's really easy to be an outspoken, angry atheist when death is a long way off. But when death is right here, it was crazy. He hated me and didn't want me to leave all at the same time. He hated me and didn't want me to leave all at the same time. It's fun being a pastor sometimes. That's supposed to be funny. And man, in that moment, in that room, I watched those years of I'm right, I don't care, I watched those years. All of a sudden, he has to stand on the very foundation he spent years building. And in that room with my grandpa, now back in McDonald's, as my dad was sharing the hope of heaven with him, and I watched my grandpa cry, I was able to taste. I mean, I can't even put words around it. Not just hear the words. Are you excited about heaven? And yes, he nods his head. I mean, I can ask a child, are you excited about heaven? And they nod their head. But it wasn't like that. Even though those were the same words in that moment, I'm watching complete brokenness. I'm watching suffering. I'm watching normal. He prayed for money and it never came. He prayed to come back from these strokes and he never did. He stayed broken all the way through. I'm watching everything erode away. And my dad says to him, are you excited about heaven? And with tears streaming down his face as he nods, yes. More than words can explain, I was able to taste the power of hope. And instead of it feeling awful in the room like it did with the other guy, in that McDonald's at that moment, there was so much peace. My brother, the huge bodybuilder weightlifter, you guys have seen him, he's a monster. He's crying, I'm crying, Dad's crying, Grandpa's crying. To all the normal people, one of the greatest gifts that you can give, see, my grandpa couldn't put in my hand money. He couldn't put in my hand a great business to run. He couldn't put in my hand, wonderful education to draw from years of all. He couldn't put any of that in my hand. He was normal. He couldn't tell the story of how God rescued him from his strokes and he can talk well and dance again. He couldn't share those stories with me. He was normal. But when my grandpa put in my hand was hope. Let me explain this more. Strengths and weaknesses. We've done this with each of the disciples. We're going to do strengths and weaknesses, a SWOT analysis. It's kind of fun to do. On the lesser known disciples, the common men. Strengths. I'm going to go ahead and invite Jason up too. We're just about done. Strengths. If you are normal, if you are one of the voices from the choir of people that aren't great, you're not super outspoken, you're not a dynamic leader, you're not the most brilliant, you don't have lots of money. If you are normal, if you know what it's like to suffer and pray that God would rescue you, and all he gives you is a hope of something yet to come. That's all you get. You're normal. You join the choir of thousands, millions of Christians through all of history, proclaiming their love not in the gifts of creation, but in the Creator. Do you get the difference? They're satisfied not in creation, they're satisfied in their Creator. If you are normal, you are faithful, you have studied the ways of Jesus, you believe in Him, even in the brokenness. Another strength, if you are a normal follower of Jesus, you have committed to a family of believers for encouragement and accountability. You're building great relationships because you're here and you're faithful. You're normal. Weaknesses, if you are normal. You may feel like you stand in the shadow of the natural leaders. You feel like you stand in the shadow of the natural leaders. Another potential weakness might be, if you are like this, you may feel like your contribution to Christianity is insignificant because you're not great. You don't want to get on stage and talk or sing or get in front of a class and teach. You don't want to do those things. It terrifies you. Hey, you're normal. You could possibly be frustrated that God didn't gift you or create you differently. If you're not careful, you could let that bitterness roll in there and you're going, I wish God would have. Threats. Now, this is where we're going to begin to sew all of this together. Threats. It's easy to feel like you are forgotten. Nobody's writing a book about you. Your name isn't on any plaque anywhere. It's easy to feel like you are less valuable. It's easy to be mad at God or jealous of those who are gifted. It's easy to believe your worth is in your gifting more than the hope of Jesus that's in your heart. I'm going to explain that in a second. I'm going to come back to that idea here in a second. Opportunities, if you are normal. Submit to all aspects of Jesus' teachings, of course, right? Submission. First thing for all of us at every gifting. Trade the perspective of your self-worth, right? Think this through. I know I'm always told, Mike, you have to word things so complicated. That's because I have to word things right. I have to think through stuff a lot. I am a person that'll write a sentence and then rewrite a sentence and graduate school broke me, I guess. I don't know. Trade the perspective of your self-worth from a worldly one to a godly one. This is what it is, okay? You ready? Your worth is in your hope. I love the way Dr. John Piper says it. He says, God is most glorified when we are most satisfied in Him, not His gifts. God is most glorified when we are most satisfied in Him, not His gifts. You are greater witness when your visible satisfaction is in Jesus, not your wisdom, influence, money, or youth. Okay. So there I am with my grandpa, the last season of his life. fully broken. There's only one other man on this planet that I would consider at that level, and that's my dad. He's crying in McDonald's. He can't speak. The ideas are in his head, but he can't get them out. He has the last few moments, right? It ends up being the last few moments to give us something. And he's so normal, he can't give me money. I've got nothing. He's got nothing. He can't give me a business that he created. He can't. He's normal. He doesn't have an incredible dynamic story about how God rescued him from these ailments in the latter part of his life. He doesn't even have that crazy story, right, of the miraculous got up and walked and did something. He doesn't even have that. But in that moment, I tasted hope. That he is not home, that he was meant for a better place. And in that moment, I realized that I can be normal and yet still have hope too. So in the sea, in the chorus, in the choir of normal people all through history that were not rescued from their financial sufferings, that were not rescued from physical ailment, that were not rescued from any of that, the ones who know what it's like to suffer, the ones who carried brokenness for years, the ones who know all of this, the sea, the choir of Christianity, the millions all through history, they scream out, Jesus is enough. And the best is yet to come. Do you believe that? Because even in being normal, when you live Jesus as your satisfaction, when you proclaim that with your children, when you teach that to your neighbors, when you share that with the people that you work with, going, God has made me satisfied. It's not the money that makes me satisfied. It's not my health that makes me satisfied. It's not my youth that makes me satisfied. It's not whatever work, influence, power. None of that is what satisfies. The deepest part of my satisfaction is simply Jesus. When you do that, all the normal people see Jesus as accessible too. So my grandpa, in his dying days, gave me hope. That's it. Just hope. And that peace floods my spirit. It washes me to the deepest part of my core. I want it to pour out of me into my children and into this church. Hope that we were meant for a place better than this. That I'll be freed from this bondage of temporal, corporeal.